Chilesaurus was a very weird dinosaur. At a distance, it may have looked almost normal, a small biped with a beak at the end of its mouth, something that evolved independently in multiple dinosaur lineages. However, a closer look at Chilesaurus's anatomy reveals a mixture of traits from all three major branches of Dinosauria: Theropoda, Sauropodomorpha, and Ornithischia. Not only is it unclear which of the three major clades this dinosaur platypus belongs to, but it has called into question how these clades are related to each other. Chilesaurus is held by some paleontologists to be a missing link between the theropods and ornithischians, two dinosaur clades previously thought to be only distantly related. Even the very definition of Dinosauria had to be revised due to the taxonomic chaos unleashed by the discovery of this unusual dinosaur. As its name implies, Chilesaurus was found in the country of Chile. Its fossils were first found in 2004 by Diego Suarez, who was only 7 years old at the time. The name of the only known species of Chilesaurus, Chilesaurus Diego Suarezi, is in his honor. Due to just how strange it was, Chilesaurus wasn't described until 2015. The site turned out to contain multiple Chilesaurus skeletons, which seem to have been part of a single herd or family group. Given how Chilesaurus possesses a mosaic of traits from various different types of dinosaurs, one could be forgiven for thinking it was a chimera, and its remains were initially mistaken for those of multiple new species. However, the mostly complete and articulated Chilesaurus holotype proved they belonged to a single, if confusing, species. This skeleton was 1.5 meters long, but the largest adult Chilesaurus had a length of over 3 meters. The arms of all specimens are in a resting position, suggesting they were killed and buried suddenly. The fossils are from the Toki Formation, which was formed 147 million years ago during the Late Jurassic. The fragmentary fossils of at least 3 species of sauropods have been found there, but so far, Chilesaurus is the only named dinosaur from the Toki Formation. However, it did coexist with the crocodilomorph Berksuchus. Like Chilesaurus, this small reptile is also thought to be a missing link, in its case, between the terrestrial and semi-aquatic ancestors of today's crocodilians. Chilesaurus had a small, short head and a long neck, an arrangement similar to that of early sauropodomorphs, but also some theropods. Its snout ended in a small beak, much like those found in ornithischians and many herbivorous theropods. It notably lacked a predentary bone, which is found at the end of the lower jaw of all known members of Ornithischia and is seen as a defining feature of the clade. Chilesaurus's teeth were tall, leaf-shaped, pointed slightly forwards, and had denticules on the tops. For all the mystery surrounding this dinosaur, something all scientists agree on is that with teeth like these, it was clearly a plant eater. Chilesaurus's forelimbs were quite odd, resembling the two-fingered arms of the later tyrannosaurids, such as Tyrannosaurus rex. Most dinosaurs had 5 digits on their forelimbs, while the theropods of the Jurassic had 3 or 4. Chilesaurus technically had 3 fingers, but the 3rd digit had atrophied to the point that it only consisted of a single, tiny nub of a bone. It is likely the vestigial remnants of the 3rd finger were entirely obscured in life. Some reconstructions of Chilesaurus portray this finger as much larger than it really was. The real bone is so small that some paleoartists have apparently either not noticed it or assumed it was a claw, mistaking the metacarpal, a hand bone, for the 3rd finger. Why Chilesaurus evolved tyrannosaurid-like hands remains unknown, but a few other dinosaurs, such as the Oviraptorosaur oxoco, also only had 2 functional fingers. Despite the visual similarity with tyrannosaurids, Chilesaurus's arms don't seem to have been used for the same purposes. They were proportional to its size, and the claw on the 1st digit was greatly enlarged, much like those of the early sauropodomorph dinosaurs. These odd forelimbs could have been used to bring tree branches closer to Chilesaurus's mouth, or for warding off predators and rivals. When resting, Chilesaurus folded its arms in a bird-like position, with the hand facing backwards. Although such a resting posture is typical of the bird-like Coelurosaurs, it has also been found in the Triassic sauropodomorph Guaibasaurus, and even Scleromochlus, who is not a dinosaur, but a relative of pterosaurs. Although not as visually striking, Chilesaurus's legs were also strange. They were similar to those of the basal members of the theropod clade Tetanurae, but they were stout like those of Sauropodomorphs. As a consequence, Chilesaurus would have been slower than most of the contemporary theropods and ornithischians. A major difference between Chilesaurus and most theropods can be found in its toes. Theropods typically had 3 main toes, while digit 1 was smaller and held off the ground. This arrangement can be seen today in many modern dinosaurs. In contrast, digit 1 in Chilesaurus was close to the size of digit 2, and it seems to have been supporting the body's weight like the other toes. This trait also evolved in the Sauropodomorphs, but the only theropods known to have such feet are the derived Therizinosaurs, who were contenders for the title of strangest dinosaurs before the discovery of Chilesaurus. Chilesaurus's pelvis was largely similar to those of the bird-like Silurosaurs, a derived clade of theropods it has never been placed within. However, while the pubices of most Silurosaurs and other theropods point forwards, Chilesaurus's pubis points backwards towards the tail. This condition is typical of the Ornithischian dinosaurs and has often been used to support its placement within the clade. However, some derived Silurosaurs, the Therizinosaurs, Dromaeosaurids, and birds, also had, or in the case of birds, have, backwards pointing pubices. Birds and Dromaeosaurids are thought to have evolved this condition to make room for larger lungs, which were necessary to support the greater activity levels that eventually led to flight. Therizinosaurs and Ornithischians are believed to have instead reversed their pubices to allow for the evolution of longer digestive tracts as they shifted towards herbivorous diets. Given its similar diet and slower speed compared to other small dinosaurs, this is considered to have been the case for Chilesaurus as well. Chilesaurus possessed numerous other traits that link it to theropods, sauropodomorphs, and ornithischians. Some may have been the result of evolutionary convergence, but determining where the dinosaur platypus belongs has been difficult, and it is in many ways more perplexing than the actual platypus. The paper that originally described Chilesaurus concluded it was a theropod, with its sauropodomorph and ornithischian-like features being attributed to evolutionary convergence resulting from their similar diets, much like what happened with the Therizinosaurs. There were other theropods who became specialized herbivores, but Chilesaurus was not closely related to any of them. It was placed as a basal member of the clade Tetanurae, which includes both the diverse Silurosaurs and the iconic carnosaurs like Allosaurus and Torvosaurus. The first Tetanurans were carnivores, and even the authors were a bit surprised that Chilesaurus was placed as a basal member of the clade instead of within Silurosauria, which contains the majority of the plant-eating theropods. The only herbivorous theropods known outside of Silurosauria are Lemusaurus and Berthosaura, but these dinosaurs were ceratosaurs, not Tetanurans. Rather than being an unusual theropod, Chilesaurus may hold a much more important place in the history of Dinosauria. A different hypothesis is that Chilesaurus was the most basal ornithischian and the missing link between Theropoda and Ornithischia, who are envisioned as forming the larger clade Ornithocelida. It is generally accepted that the earliest members of all 3 branches of Dinosauria started out as superficially theropod-like carnivores, but the previous consensus of dinosaur relationships held that the true theropods were more closely related to Sauropodomorpha, forming the clade Saurischia. Ever since the Ornithocelida hypothesis was first published in 2017, there really hasn't been a firm consensus of how the 3 major branches are related to each other, with roughly equal statistical support for Ornithocelida, the traditional Saurischian model, and even Phytodinosauria, a proposed grouping of Ornithischia and Sauropodomorpha. Although it may rewrite what we know about the dinosaurs, Chilesaurus's identity may not be able to be solved without first resolving the greater interrelationships within Dinosauria. A major issue when discussing the classification of Chilesaurus is that all of the datasets used to test its relationships were inadequate. The original description didn't include many ornithischians in its phytogenetic analysis, while the analyses that concluded Chilesaurus was an ornithischian didn't include many Tetanuran theropods. Essentially, neither was capable of refuting the findings of the other. For all the uncertainty surrounding this dinosaurian platypus, an undeniable and lasting impact it has had on dinosaur science is that it caused the actual definition of dinosaur to be revised. Dinosauria was previously defined as the last common ancestor of the Ornithischians, represented by Triceratops, and the Theropods, represented by the house sparrow, and all the descendants of that common ancestor. Sauropodomorpha had always been intended to be a part of Dinosauria, but it hadn't been added to the formal definition since it was assumed that the theropods had shared a more recent common ancestor with them than with the Ornithischians. The discovery of the small, unassuming Chilesaurus and the resulting Ornithocelida hypothesis jeopardized the status of an entire branch of Dinosauria. Even Brontosaurus, who had ironically been reinstated as a valid genus the same year that Chilesaurus was described, wouldn't be considered a dinosaur if the Ornithocelida model proved correct. To avoid creating unnecessary confusion, it was decided that it was easier to just add the sauropod Diplodocus as one of the defining members of Dinosauria. Regardless of the status of Ornithocelida or Saurischia, Chilesaurus may not be the missing link it was once thought to be. More recent research has proposed that the most basal Ornithischians were instead Chilesaurs, small reptiles from the Triassic period who were previously not even considered true dinosaurs, but instead closely related dinosauromorphs. One of the papers which came to this conclusion was notably co-authored by Dr. Matthew Barron, one of the most notable architects and major proponents of the Ornithocelida hypothesis. Although both Chilesaurus and Chilesaurs lacked a predentary bone, the lower jaws of the Chilesaurs had a similar shape to it and seemed to be its evolutionary predecessor. The Chilesaurs have a more primitive anatomy compared to Chilesaurus, including a forward-facing pubis and a primarily quadrupedal stance, but also lack Chilesaurus's purported transitional theropod-like traits. The paper, recently co-authored by Dr. Barron, instead placed Chilesaurus in the clade Heterodontosauridae, a slightly more derived position within Ornithischia. Heterodontosaurids were small, bipedal omnivores and herbivores. They did not share Chilesaurus's eccentricities, but had large fang-like tusks at the end of their mouths. If this placement is accurate, then Chilesaurus not only lost the Ornithischian predentary bone, but these trademark tusks as well. Rather than representing the early transition from theropod-like forms to the more traditional Ornithischians, the heterodontosaurid hypothesis considers Chilesaurus to simply be an aberrant member of its clade, much as the theropod hypothesis considers it to be a highly divergent basal tetanuran. Although Chilesaurus had some traits similar to the sauropodomorphs, the possibility that it belongs to the clade has received the least support. The only phylogenetic analysis which initially favored this conclusion turned out to have been based on erroneous data. The authors of the study tried to use the same dataset as the paper which initially proposed the Ornithocelida hypothesis to see if they could replicate the results. Unfortunately, the authors of the first paper had accidentally uploaded an older version of their dataset, one which contained errors. Once the corrected data was used, the authors of the second study ended up with the same conclusion of Chilesaurus being the most basal Ornithischian, even if they found the results debatable due to the lack of tetanuran theropods in the dataset. If Chilesaurus was a sauropodomorph, it would be quite an exceptional example for its time. It most closely resembles early members of Sauropodomorpha, who were just starting to become specialized herbivores. Only larger, more derived species are known to have survived into the Jurassic period, and sauropods are thought to have been the only remaining sauropodomorphs by the Late Jurassic. Even if Chilesaurus is the most basal known Ornithischian, it would not be a very good example of what the first Ornithischians looked like. Although there are a few other dinosaurs whose placement within Dinosauria is also unclear, they are all early dinosaurs, from the time when the various dinosaur lineages hadn't yet changed that much from each other. The same cannot be said for Chilesaurus. This Frankensaur lived during the Late Jurassic, and despite the wildly different classifications it has received, all paleontologists agree that its ancestors diverged from all other known dinosaurs no later than the early Jurassic, nearly 50 million years earlier. In all likelihood, the Chilesaurus ghost lineage dates all the way back to the Triassic period. It would have changed greatly during that time, and it clearly acquired a number of traits found in a number of different derived dinosaur clades. It took less time for small bipedal ornithischians to become armored behemoths like Stegosaurus. In any event, although it lacked showy horns or crests, this small herbivore is the strangest dinosaur known to science. This is true regardless of whether it was a late survivor representing the transition to the more familiar ornithischians or sauropodomorphs, a highly divergent theropod or heterodontosaurid, or something else entirely. No matter where it fits within Dinosauria, Chilesaurus had an unprecedented collection of traits convergent with many of its distant relatives. The debate about its relationships, and those of Dinosauria as a whole, remain unsolved, so much more research awaits regarding the Dinosaur Platypus. Its long ghost lineage also suggests that many new types of closely related dinosaurs await discovery. But for now, Chilesaurus remains unique from all other known dinosaurs.
Thank you for watching, and a thank you to the Themattalorian for narrating this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Finally, be sure to have a great day.